Welcome to Life Stories, where we share real-life tales of resilience, love, and personal growth. Today's story is one of hidden sacrifices, unspoken truths, and the strength it takes to finally stand up for yourself. It's about Sophie, a woman who spent years working in the shadows to support her family, all while building a successful business in secret. But when the truth is revealed at her sister's wedding, everything changes. Join us as we dive into this powerful journey of self-discovery, family, and triumph. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to start today's story. It was a cold winter evening in Boston when I returned home after another long day of work. The snow had begun to fall, and I trudged through the quiet streets, my footsteps echoing in the stillness, as I opened the door to the small apartment I shared with my mother, Linda, and my younger sister, Rachel. A chill hit me. It was always cold here, no matter how many layers I wore or how much I wished for warmth. I had become used to it over the years, used to the emptiness in the air, used to the silence that greeted me after every shift. I had just finished my third part-time job for the day. It wasn't much, but it kept the bills paid, at least for the time being. The familiar sound of my mother and sister laughing in the kitchen drifted to me. And for a moment, it almost felt normal again. But I knew it wasn't. "Oh, Sophie, you're home," my mother called without turning around, her voice as detached as ever. She wasn't being cruel, no. She just didn't know how to be anything else. Her life had become a haze of bitterness and alcohol after my father passed away. At the kitchen table sat Rachel, her eyes glued to her college laptop. Unlike me, she had beauty, bright, radiant beauty that everyone noticed. I didn't mind that. Not really. She deserved it. "Good work today," she said, her attention never leaving the screen. But there was no real warmth behind her words. It was a statement, not a question. I took off my coat and sat down at the small kitchen table. This tiny apartment had been home to the three of us since I was 16. My father's death had completely altered our lives. Before he passed away from cancer, we had dreams, we had hope, but once he was gone, it all slipped away. My mother drowned in grief, and I was left to fill the gaps. Rachel was just starting high school when it happened, and she had no idea how the world was about to change for us. I had dreams too, big dreams. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to study business and eventually start my own company. But after Dad's death, those dreams seemed foolish. The bills mounted, and someone had to work. So, I dropped out of high school during my sophomore year to help support the family. "Rachel," I asked quietly, trying to make conversation, "how was your mock trial at law school?" Rachel's face lit up. "It was wonderful. The professor said it was the best argument in the class. And I got the internship too," she added with a smile that brightened the whole room. For a moment, I couldn't help but smile along with her. She deserved this. My mother, who had barely said a word to me, suddenly embraced Rachel with a proud, drunken smile. "My daughter is truly exceptional. She'll be a first-class lawyer one day. Your father would be so proud," she said. It wasn't the first time I had heard this sentiment, but it still stung every time. I smiled back, though my heart felt heavy. The woman I once admired had become a shadow of the person she used to be. And Rachel had become the center of her world. I forced a smile, but I couldn't shake the sadness that lingered behind my eyes. When Dad was still alive, I had talked about my dreams of college and business too. I was a good student, one of the best in my class. But my mother never saw that. She didn't believe in me. "Sophie isn't suited for studying," she would often say. The truth was, I was more than capable of going to college. I just didn't have the chance. I worked a variety of jobs, waitressing, cleaning, working as a convenience store clerk, and I gave almost every cent I earned to support the family. My wages paid for Rachel's education, for my mother's medical expenses, and for everything else that came with keeping our broken home afloat. "Look at this, Sophie," Rachel suddenly said, interrupting my thoughts. She showed me her phone with a picture of a beach. "I'm going to Miami with my friends during spring break. It's to celebrate getting the law firm internship. I smiled, reaching for my wallet. Is this enough? I asked, pulling out some cash. Rachel took the money without even looking up, barely acknowledging me. Thanks, she said casually, as if it were expected. There was no real gratitude in her voice. It stung, but I didn't say anything. What could I say? I had always been the invisible sister, the one who made sacrifices without ever being noticed. Later, after they had both gone to bed, I retreated to my small room, the one that had once been my sanctuary. I pulled a box from under my bed and opened my laptop. This was my secret time, the only time when I could escape from the weight of the world. I had been teaching myself business, taking online courses, learning web design, and marketing. It wasn't easy, but it was my only way out. 2 years ago, I started a small online shop. At first, it was just a few orders here and there, but gradually, it grew. I kept it all a secret. I didn't think my mother or Rachel would take it seriously. To them, I was just the failure, the one who had dropped out of high school and given up on her dreams. But they didn't see what I was building in the background. They didn't see the woman I was becoming. Months passed, and I continued to quietly work on my business while my mother and sister's lives unfolded in the same predictable pattern. Rachel thrived in law school, and though my mother rarely acknowledged it, Rachel had become her shining star. My own life, by contrast, was spent in the shadows, invisible to them, just the sister who worked hard but never achieved anything of note. At least in their eyes. Then came the phone call. Sophie, big news. Rachel's voice trembled with excitement over the phone. Jason proposed to me. He's the son of the Reynolds family. You know, the wealthy ones. Our wedding's in 3 months. You'll come, won't you? I froze. Jason was a handsome man. Tall and imposing. The kind of guy who seemed to come from another world. A world of wealth and power. It was a world I had never been a part of. And here was Rachel, my sister, about to step into it. Of course, I'll come. Congratulations, I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. Rachel's words poured out in a rush, detailing the lavish wedding, the luxurious hotel, the expensive dress, and the hundreds of guests. Make sure you wear something decent. Sophie, she added, a subtle sting in her tone. Don't embarrass me. As she continued to talk about the details, I couldn't help but feel the familiar pang of resentment. But I pushed it down. Today wasn't about me, it was about Rachel, and I would do what I always did, remain in the background, supporting her from the shadows. The day of the wedding arrived, and I stepped into the grand hotel ballroom with a sense of disbelief. The entire place had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with white and silver decorations sparkling under the soft lights. I was taken aback by the sheer opulence of it all. This was the life Rachel had always dreamed of, the life I could never give her. I stood for a moment, taking in the scene, before I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find my mother standing beside me, dressed in a flashy red gown with sparkling jewels. She looked at me with a faint smile, the kind that felt more like a critique than a compliment. Well, you look surprisingly presentable, she remarked, her voice lacking warmth. Of course, Mom. It's Rachel's special day, I replied, my smile never faltering, though inside I felt the sting of her words. My mother, in her usual fashion, ignored me after that. She was too busy preening, too busy basking in the attention of the people who surrounded her, to notice anything beyond the fact that Rachel's wedding was the ultimate achievement. As I walked around the venue, I greeted a few familiar faces, old high school friends, distant relatives from my mother's side, and tried to avoid answering too many questions about my life. The truth was, I didn't want to tell them about the business I was building, the success that was slowly coming my way. They wouldn't understand. To them, I was still the dropout, the failure. The ceremony began, and the groom, Jason, stood tall at the altar. His eyes filled with love as he gazed at Rachel, the perfect bride. Rachel looked radiant in her white gown, the picture of a fairy tale. But as the MC announced the first toast, I felt a strange tightness in my chest. The moment came, and my mother took the microphone. She smiled that plastic smile of hers, the one she wore at every gathering, and began to speak. "Thank you all for gathering here today for my daughter Rachel's wedding," she began, her voice full of pride. "I am truly a happy mother to have such a wonderful daughter and to see her being welcomed into such a wonderful family." I shifted uncomfortably, knowing what was coming. "But," she continued, "let me tell you all a little secret." Her tone changed slightly, as if she were about to reveal some great, hidden truth. "Rachel is my only real daughter." There was a ripple of laughter through the crowd, and I felt my heart skip a beat. "Actually, some of you might know my other daughter, Sophie," she added, pointing to me. The lights of the venue suddenly shifted toward me, and I felt my cheeks flush. I remained still, trying not to show the turmoil brewing inside me. "Sophie here." My mother paused, drawing out the words. "Well, Sophie is a failure. High school dropout. No children. Divorced." She laughed, the sound too loud in the otherwise silent room. "She has nothing going for her. Unlike Rachel." The words hit me like a slap. The entire room laughed uncomfortably, some guests exchanging glances with each other. My face burned with humiliation, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had grown used to being the invisible one, the one who worked tirelessly in the background without ever receiving recognition. But this was something else. This was an attack on my very worth. As my mother continued to speak about Rachel's accomplishments, her perfect life, I couldn't help but wonder, when would my time come? When would I be seen? I wasn't sure, but I knew that today, of all days, I would not let my mother's words break me. Not now, not ever. The ceremony continued, but for me, it had already ended. The hurtful words my mother had spoken lingered in the air like a poison, clouding everything around me. My sister, Rachel, still beamed with her perfect bride smile. But there was something off about the way she looked at me, something I couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was guilt, or maybe it was the realization that her world of perfection was about to collide with reality. I tried to retreat into the background, as I always did, but my thoughts kept swirling. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I had never said, about my years of sacrifice, about the dreams I had put aside for her, about how hard I had worked to make sure she had everything she needed. But in that moment, I couldn't find the words. It wasn't the time, and frankly, it wasn't the place. I had no intention of ruining Rachel's day, despite what my mother had done. Then, the moment came when I wasn't prepared for it. The reception was underway, and it was time for speeches. As I sat quietly, nursing a glass of wine and trying to ignore the stares of others, my sister stood up and took the microphone. I didn't expect much, certainly not a gesture of sincerity, but what happened next took me by surprise. Rachel's voice trembled as she spoke. "Everyone, I know you've been surprised by what my mother said about my sister, Sophie." She paused, a slight smirk on her lips, and I could see the underlying malice in her expression. "But don't tease my sister too much, she might cry," Rachel added, her tone dripping with subtle sarcasm. The room chuckled awkwardly. I didn't react, just sat there quietly, my eyes fixed on my glass, hoping that somehow the attention would drift away from me. But Rachel wasn't done. She continued, her words seemingly sincere but veiled with irony. "You see, Sophie has always helped me. She gave up her own dreams to make sure I could go to college. She worked hard so I could have everything." There it was again, the same familiar feeling of being unseen, of being reduced to a silent giver. Her words were, on the surface, filled with gratitude, but I could sense something deeper, something colder. Rachel never fully acknowledged the depth of my sacrifice. To her, I was a tool for her success. Nothing more. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of guilt and superiority. It hurt, but I didn't react. I had learned long ago to remain calm when everything inside me screamed for attention. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from sitting in the same position for too long. The room fell silent as I walked toward the stage. I could feel all eyes on me, but I didn't falter. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for me, not for anyone else. When I took the microphone from Rachel's hands, I could feel the weight of the moment. The tension in the room was palpable. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch before speaking. Today, I'm truly happy that my sister Rachel has found someone she loves, and that she's starting a new chapter in her life. I began, my voice steady but quiet. But I also want to share a little of our family's story. A story that's often left untold. I paused, letting my words sink in. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of people who had no idea what it had taken for me to get here. For me to even be standing in front of them today. When I was 16, I lost my father to cancer. And in that moment, everything changed. My world, our world, was turned upside down. I continued, my voice soft but firm. I had to drop out of high school to help my family. My mother couldn't cope, and Rachel was too young to understand what was happening. I worked 3 jobs to make sure that Rachel could go to a good school, that our family could survive. I could feel my breath catch in my throat as I spoke. But I didn't stop. I was never unhappy. I wanted the best for Rachel. But I've never shared this story because I didn't think anyone would understand. I've always been the silent one, the invisible one, the one who worked in the shadows. But I want you to know the truth. I looked at my mother, her face a mixture of anger and embarrassment. And then at Rachel, who was visibly uncomfortable. Yes, I'm a high school dropout. I don't have children. I've never been married, because I've been too busy supporting this family. But I'm proud of what I've done. I paused, feeling a strange sense of peace come over me. And for the record, I paid for this beautiful wedding today, because I wanted Rachel to have everything she's dreamed of. The silence that followed was deafening. People whispered, exchanging glances, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Rachel's face was a picture of shock. She had no idea what I had sacrificed for her. She had never known the full extent of what I had done to make sure she had the future she wanted. I continued, my voice steady now. I started a small online business a few years ago. It wasn't much at first, but it grew. Now, I'm the founder of Elite Innovation. My company is thriving. It works with Fortune 500 companies. And I wanted you all to know that. Because I want to be seen for who I am, not for the failure you think I am. At that moment, there was a rustle from the back of the room. An elderly man stood up, his voice strong and commanding. Miss Sophie Johnson? He asked. His eyes focused on me. You're the founder of Elite Innovation? He paused. I know your company. It's been featured in business magazines. You're the one behind it? I nodded, feeling a sense of pride swell within me. Yes, that's right. The man nodded with a respectful smile. I've heard a lot about your work. You've done something remarkable, young lady. The buzz in the room grew louder as the reality of my success sank in. My mother, once so sure of her narrative, now looked like a ghost. Her face drained of color. Rachel, too, seemed at a loss for words. The tables had turned. But I wasn't here to gloat. I wasn't here to make anyone feel small. I was here to finally speak the truth, my truth. And the truth was, I was proud of who I had become. The room was filled with a heavy silence, as if everyone was trying to process the revelations that had just unfolded. My mother sat in a daze, unable to grasp the full extent of what I had shared. Rachel stood motionless, her face a mixture of shock and guilt, unsure of how to respond. I knew this was a turning point for both of them, for all of us. As the applause from the guests slowly started to build, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. The years of silence, of living in the shadows, had finally come to an end. For the first time, I had spoken my truth. And in doing so, I had freed myself. I didn't need validation from anyone anymore. Especially not from my mother or Rachel. I had built my life, my success, on my own terms. Rachel approached me afterward, her eyes filled with tears. Sophie, I'm so sorry, she whispered. I had no idea. I never realized how much you sacrificed for me. She looked down, almost as if ashamed. I smiled softly, taking her hands in mine. The past is the past. Rachel, what matters is now. We can start fresh. As we embraced, I knew our relationship would never be the same again. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about understanding, empathy, and growth. Rachel and I had both come to realize that family wasn't just about blood. It was about love and the sacrifices we make for each other. Outside the window, the spring sun began to shine brightly over the city, signaling the start of new beginnings. For me, it was more than just a season. It was the start of a new chapter, one where I could finally live authentically, unapologetically, and with pride. Thank you for watching this life story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about overcoming struggles and finding success. Stay tuned for more.